welcome to this edition of the Desktop Team Indaba. We are here to talk about the new latest Lunar Lobster release. It's been very exciting. We have a great crew of canonicalers here to answer your questions. And yeah, let's dive into the excitement. So Tim is right here. He's our new director. And so, yes. Oh, am I on that side? And then Tim's our director. Elio is our UX canonical design expert. We have Ollie down there, who is our product manager for Ubuntu. And Ken is one of the leads of the desktop team. So I'd like to pass it around to just say a quick few words about yourself. Tim, since you're new, do you want to go first and introduce yourself to the lovely folks?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Tim. I am, as Heather said, the Director of Engineering for the desktop team. Joined about 2 months ago, and yeah, super excited and happy to be here. A little bit about myself. I am a Canadian who's lived in the UK, so you might hear some weird accents coming out of me. I've got a career in kind of cybersecurity, cyber warfare, information architecture, software engineering, and then super excited to join the desktop team and help take the desktop into the future. So thanks for the warm welcome, and that's me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Elio, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Elio. I've been actually at Canonical for 2.5 years, but this is my first Indaba. So I've been at Mozilla, Tor project, and a lot of other free open source projects before. I've used to be also a Fedora ambassador, so I know all sides. So yeah, I'm leading UX design on desktop for the past 2 years now, almost. Happy to be here.
We're glad to have you. Ollie, do you want to go?
Hello, everyone. I'm sure everybody knows me by now, but I'm Oliver. I'm the product manager for Ubuntu. I've been here coming up to 2 years, glorious 2 years. I'll let everyone know when it's my anniversary. But yeah, super excited to have this crack team and talking about the latest release.
And Ken.
Sure. Ken Van Dyne, engineering manager. I've been on a number of these Indabas at this point, so everybody's probably seen me before. I've been around for 14 years, a little over 14 years now.
Well, I am so glad to have you all. And yeah, 14 years is quite an accomplishment. Only 12 more years to go, Ollie. Yeah, so this is our kind of team to talk about the new release. So I would like to ask you all what you would like to highlight the most about the new release. What's your favorite thing?
So Tim. I mean, there's lots of nuggets of gold in there. I'm going to focus on one thing in particular, which may not be immediately obvious to everyone, but what I really quite like is the new Ubuntu font. I think it's, on a modern bit of hardware with a high resolution monitor, it looks fantastic. And it really it's very subtle, but it totally uplifts the visual presentation of the desktop and really brings the Ubuntu brand coherently from web into the desktop. And so I think it's a great bit of work there. I'll say, yes, there are some rough edges. There's some bits that need to be fixed. We are aware of those. And I know for some people who might be on older hardware or lower resolution monitors, it might not be the best experience for you, but we are going to provide a legacy Ubuntu font for those folks as well. So I think, if you've got that new hardware and you want it to look great, the new variable font is the one for you. And if you've got some older hardware where maybe it's not as good for you, well, we're gonna provide a solution for that as well. So that's a bit that, I'm pretty excited about.
Yeah, nice. Elio, as the designer, what's your expert opinion on your favorite thing?
Well, the new slideshow is definitely my favorite thing because it doesn't feel as much as we lived 10 years ago. It's relevant to everyone who uses Ubuntu nowadays. So I think the story we are telling is pretty good now, and it feels equivalent to what people are actually using Ubuntu for. So yeah, that's definitely my favorite thing.
Yeah. Ollie, surely you have a favorite.
Well, I'm a big fan of the new installer. I think I think one of the interesting things is we put a lot of work into making Ubuntu a really enjoyable experience for developers everywhere to use. And I think the sort of logical conclusion of that is if you enjoy using Ubuntu, then you want to use it everywhere. And that includes using it at work. And I think that's why it's valuable for everybody sort of see some of the underlying infrastructure that we do in terms of making Ubuntu easy for organizations or educational institutions to adopt. In terms of the way we're working on sort of desktop deployment, in terms of how the new installer's code base works, it brings things together in line with the server installer. It makes it much easier to customize Ubuntu desktop, harden it, add additional security and management tools like the Azure Active Directory stuff that we've worked on this cycle. I think making sure that we invest time in playing nicely with how existing organizations' infrastructure works means that Ubuntu can be brought into those environments, and people who enjoy engaging with Ubuntu at home have learned to develop on Ubuntu, maybe at school, they can continue using it all the way through into the workplace, right up to sort of really high-end, serious data science, machine learning, data center administration sort of jobs. So I think that's the thing that really excites me. I think we're on a path now to making Ubuntu extremely easy to deploy and customize at scale. And the more we adopt in that space, the more investment we can put into that core experience, which is why people want to use it at work in the first place. So I think it's a bit of a behind the scenes change, right? What most people are going to see is that visual presentation and the overhaul to that, which is a fantastic benefit of moving to Flutter. But I'm really excited about the underlying technology because I think it unlocks a whole host of ways to tailor Ubuntu desktop for organizations. And I think that's something that everybody sees the benefit of in the long term.
Yeah. Good points. Ken, what's your favorite thing?
I was going to say the installer as well. I mean, I think we've been putting a lot of energy the last few years in our kind of Flutter developer story, and the installer was kind of our first big exercise in really leveraging that technology and how do we put it to use and really kind of pushing that ecosystem.
Yeah, I have to third that, I guess. The new installer is just gorgeous. So when I did a fresh install on my system, I just couldn't disregard how gorgeous and smooth the Flutter UI look is. And I mean, as Ollie mentioned, there's a lot of benefit kind of on the back end there that we'll talk about in a little bit as well. So that's awesome. Thank you all for your favorites. So I would like, in the Linux space, especially with the Steam Deck, gaming on Linux has become a bigger and bigger story to tell. So Ken, can you speak a little bit as the leader of the gaming team? What's new in Ubuntu gaming?
Well, so far we've spent a lot of time on really kind of bringing the quality of the Steam Snap up to the level we expected it to be at, to really ease the gamer experience on Linux. Historically, it's been difficult to get your gaming environment set up, getting the right versions of Mesa and things like that installed on your system. So we've put a lot of energy into delivering Steam as a snap where it can bring along all those things that you need right out of the box. And the great news is now, as of a couple weeks ago, it's been promoted to stable now, and we're no longer labeling it early access. We feel it's ready for everybody to really use and to benefit from. So that's very exciting. So we put a lot of energy into that. One of the big pieces to that was delivering things like Mesa, which is those user space drivers that are necessary for many users out there, that people often would enable PPAs to install those on their systems to get newer versions of those sorts of things on their systems, which would then destabilize, like GNOME Shell, for example. It puts them at risk in being able to accomplish their everyday job. We're able to deliver those things as a separate content snap, and you can kind of pick and choose how aggressive do you want to be? Do you want daily builds of Mesa for your gaming experience? You can effectively do that now because of the way we're delivering that as a separate content snap. And we're going to make that even more seamless in the future for how you will pick and choose. But we've delivered the infrastructure to be able to do that. which is
I
very exciting.
had a great experience with that when I'm just looking at now. It was in February when Zinc landed a update to Mesa that improved performance on Doom, which is one of my favorite games. And it was so nice to see a story about that performance improvement landing in Mesa and then have that come through to the Steam Snap. I think it was 2 days later. That was just a fantastic example of the kind of benefits where we can bring those improvements straight to users as quickly as possible, and a really strong benefit for this sort of approach.
Exactly.
Yeah, honestly, like from my own personal experience, the Steam Snap seems to work beautifully. So on Saturday, I was playing Diablo 4 beta because that ended on Sunday with some friends on my Steam Deck. And then I went to my desktop and it just remembered everything and worked seamlessly. And it was a lot of fun. And now I can't wait to actually get the full game. Yeah, so gaming on Ubuntu it's easy, it's beautiful, and it just works, which is, I think, kind of our whole shtick, right? Making things just work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also led to believe that you guys have fixed the that font bug that was in Steam. So I don't know if that's landed yet, but I'm quite excited for those of us who cringe when we see Times New Roman. I think it is in places that it shouldn't be. Yeah.
You're all about fonts on this.
I'm all about fonts.
Yes, that is fixed in the Edge channel. It has not been promoted to stable yet. But the TLDR there is basically the font looked appropriate if you happen to have ever installed any wine games on your system in the past. But if you had like a brand new install, it would drop back to Times New Roman. So we had to do some font config magic in the Snap to fix that. But that has landed now.
Fantastic. Cool. Sadly, I have no other font shout outs to do, so that will be the last time I mention fonts.
Sure, Tim, sure.
You still got some time to come up with some font shout outs. Okay, well, sorry to put you in the hot seat, Ken, but as our veteran, as the leader of the Flutter folks, can you talk a little, we raved about the installer a little bit in our intros, but can you talk a little bit more about why there's a new Flutter-based installer?
Yes, definitely. So a number of years ago now, the server team took on the work, or actually our foundations team took on the work of providing a new installer primarily for server. So Ubuntu Server got this new Subiquity installer years ago now. And really, desktop has been the only one that's been using this legacy code base for an installer for quite a while. So really what we wanted to do is be able to consolidate those efforts and reduce some of that technical debt and leverage all the great work that's gone into Subiquity. So we did a bunch of work with the foundations team to kind of abstract away the user experience for the server installer from the back end, and then have a Flutter-based UI that drives the same Subiquity backend. So we can leverage all of those improvements and features as they get added, those sorts of things, improve support for stuff, better testing, leverage all those things across products. So really reducing a lot of technical debt. It's much better environment going forward to be able to deliver some of these great features. We were also able to leverage some really cool provisioning, like Ali had mentioned our deployment story a little bit. Subiquity had some really nice auto install features and the ability to deploy servers in an automated fashion, reproducible types of systems. And now we can leverage that very nicely in the desktop installer as well, because we're sharing that same common backend. So that was really one of the big motivations to creating a new installer, was we wanted to be able to leverage that. A nice little side benefit of that is now we get this beautiful, gorgeous Flutter-based UI for the installer that we can really focus on that user experience and what that UX looks like and the visual design, without having to worry about the back end ourselves, because the foundations team handles that. They're the Subiquity experts. We work with them to deliver the features that we need, but we can really focus on that high polish, just beautiful look. So that's a nice side effect of that as well.
Yeah. Also, as someone that's done some manual testing for the release, I've noticed that there were some bugs that were annoying that have been fixed by this, which is very nice. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about it. Do we want to watch a little video about it? Here is the actual link if folks want to watch it on their own. But let's see if this works if I full screen it. Yeah. I don't know if you guys will hear it.
We do not yet, but I think that's.
Oh, you don't? Oh, well. Shoot.
Elio, can you just fill in the song for us? Just overlay that to the video itself, please.
Yeah, 'cause
Keyboard layout.
there's really cool music.
I thought the music reminded me of Gil Scott-Heron's "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," which is kind of edgy for an installer.
We can fill in all the details here ourselves. So as you see, this is the disk selector.
Look how smooth that is.
It is very nice.
No models anymore. Beautiful summaries now.
So gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm not talking because this music is so loud. I wish. Sorry, I didn't think about routing the sound. I'm not sure how to do that.
Well, the visuals are what's
But look
really
how-
important there.
The visuals are what's really important. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, sorry for that silence. Oh no. Autoplay, you know? Yeah, so such a gorgeous installer. If anybody hasn't had a chance to try it out, just go make a quick VM, download the ISO and give it a shot, and you'll be blown away by just how smooth. I can't find a better word. It's just so smooth and slick.
Well, just be aware that if you install it in a VM, you probably won't get hardware rendering, so it won't be as smooth as if you install it on real hardware.
That's true. That's true. It still looks pretty smooth compared to the old installer, in my opinion. I've done mostly VM installs, but a fresh install on my hardware system
absolutely.
back in January, right? And it looked amazing then. So, yeah. Anyways, great video. There's the link if you want to go listen to the music, which is very, very cool. So, Elio, I'm going to throw the ball to you. Besides the beautiful installer, what is new with UX?
Right, yeah. So UX and design is kind of a blurry thing. So I'll try to wrap it around how I think about it. So we have been working on this new installer for a little bit of time now, for a little bit over 2 years, if not more. But when we started, we kind of Flutterized Ubiquity, right? The old installer. So we tried to make it work in Flutter, which was not really a redesign from the ground up. We did not doubt these design decisions, which have been in Ubuntu for over a decade, right? And exactly doubting these little legacy things was something I think is very special about this new installer, where we took a step back and said, people, do we know what kind of context this design decision has? And no one knew why we decided to do it like that, right? So we kind of reimagined things and took a more holistic approach, which I think was very good. And we got rid of some stuff. We added a few things. We made everything more readable, I hope. Not a font pun or anything, but really the information architecture is quite better now. So I'm pretty proud of that, and also very humbled that, it seems to be a highlight for a lot of people here as well. On other things I personally care about, it was also quite good to work with the Yarrow community. So thanks to everyone involved at Yarrow, who have been very tirelessly working with us to get changes in Yarrow up and running, because we were working very fast, and I'm sometimes I feel bad for putting this on the community, but so I appreciate very much how helpful they've been with these changes. And yeah, the accessibility part was also one of the things we try to improve. And I must say this was one of the bigger challenges with Flutter not having accessibility out of the box. So some of these things, GNOME has a little bit more legacy, but also some little bit more design depth in. So We improved a few things, but we still have quite a lot of work to do in terms of accessibility. So watch out for the next release, where this should be even more accessible for screen reader users and people who use their keyboards without a mouse. And so last but not least, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot about things like that, but BitLocker. Windows encryption has been quite a pain. Before, we were not allowing users to install Ubuntu on an encrypted partition where Windows BitLocker was enabled. I don't want to go into details, but all of the different quantum mechanics of this decision making of when to allow installation and when not was really difficult. But now we allow everyone to do that. So yeah, these were all my highlights. But it's a lot, I know.
I think the BitLocker story, I think, is really exciting, because from our perspective and from the Ubuntu platform ethos, security is a really big deal. And we spend a lot of time making sure that Ubuntu is secure out of the box. We give additional hardening tools and ability to sort of lock down your system. There's lots of documentation on that. But it seemed counterintuitive to go, okay, well, we want you to install Ubuntu and we're going to make Ubuntu secure. But to do that, you have to make your Windows partition unsecure. And that was something that we felt very strongly. We shouldn't ever have to ask the user to downgrade their security if they didn't have to. So there are certain situations where if you want to install Ubuntu alongside a BitLocker partition and it's on the same, and there's only one drive, then you are going to have to turn off BitLocker. But we went through every other scenario where if you want to install Ubuntu on a separate hard drive and you don't need to touch the home partition, or if you have the ability to resize your BitLocker partition and create space for Ubuntu, then we wanted to make sure that we were able to detect those scenarios and install in the space that you could, without having the sort of a lazy fallback of going, well, just turn off BitLocker just so that we've got all the information we need. And I think that's a really important, quality that we felt we really needed to support in that situation if we really wanted to stay true to our sort of premise of being secure.
So I know that Canonical has a relationship with Microsoft. Has there been some sort of back and forth there to make it, I guess, better security and user-friendly all around, or maybe that's not needed?
I mean, we have a lot of ongoing discussions with Microsoft about sort of partnerships around things like the Azure Active Directory work that we're doing. Obviously, in WSL land, we spend a lot of time collaborating with them on systemd, and we're also looking at ways to make WSL more secure and more manageable. Things like AppArmor rules in the kernel and the ability to be able to monitor your system and manage the packages in there. For BitLocker, we didn't really need to have those conversations. It was more about having Subiquity is just a little bit smarter than the old installer and is able to sort of provide feedback on when certain things are available and when they aren't. And so we just had much better ways of detecting the state of the Windows partition. And so it wasn't really something that needed a discussion with Microsoft, although it's always nice to chat to those folks.
Right. Well, thanks. I want to go to the comment section real quick. So Ubuntu Portugal, referencing the installer, said they did lots of installations and they believed people were very happy with it. That's been my experience too, just judging from Reddit and Twitter. People really like the new installer. And then they asked a very important question regarding accessibility. Is there something the community can do to help test the accessibility features of Flutter apps on the Linux desktop?
I can probably chime into that. Yes, we would love some support on that. So there's a GitHub repo with the Ubuntu Flutter desktop installer. And there are two things you can test depending on what you feel most comfortable with. One is a keyboard accessibility. So the installer you should be able to install Ubuntu to your liking without using a mouse. So if you are able to test it out with your keyboard, let us know if there are any issues on GitHub. And the second thing is screen reader. So using Orca, the screen reader in Ubuntu, it should call out all of the names, all of the buttons and options for people with for blind users, for example, who are unable to see what's on their screen. Yeah, these are the two major things. Of course, there are also other smaller things, but this would already help immensely. Yeah.
If I can just add a few bits, Elio. So I mean, some of the stuff Elio's touched on as well as work we're going to do this cycle as well, right? So if you go into the Flutter installer today and take a look at the keyboard navigation, that is great to help us inform that work. But what will also, would be super helpful is when we come closer to the community testing weeks towards the end of the cycle, and when people are able to jump in and use the development builds in giving feedback, then that's super helpful as well. So like there's go in now, yes, take a look, but actually as we progress this work and as the installer gets further refined through the cycle, towards the second half is when a lot of that information or a lot of that input in that testing would be super valuable. I mean, if everyone jumped in on the community testing week or two that we do towards the end of the cycle, which is published on Discourse, that's kind of the perfect time to do it, because we will have had a little bit of time to get ahead of some of the design and implementation details, and then you can kind of take a look at that more complete implementation.
Yeah, I think the Portugal folks are suggesting they could maybe organize some sort of Hackfest testing session with them to maybe kickstart that a little bit sooner than testing week, which would be cool. Yeah, so maybe I think it's something we need to do for the next cycle anyways, is to kind of put together some achievable accessibility goals there. Like I think just doing the install with just a keyboard, and if someone that is visually challenged can use a screen reader to do that, that's a goal that maybe we can achieve by the next cycle, and maybe more too. So.
And I think it's a little bit broader than just the installer, right? It's, the ability to, properly support accessibility features in any Flutter app on Linux. So, we could broaden it to not just how do we use the installer. Of course, that's our most immediate need, but we do care greatly about app developers being able to bring their apps to Linux. So broadening that a little bit would be great.
Since we're talking about Flutter apps, Ken, do you want to speak to any future Flutter apps that we could expect to see?
Well, as everybody knows, we have been working on a new software store that's still in the works. And of course, we're, still working to kind of seed that ecosystem. We're building out more and more packages as we see platform needs. So other app developers coming from other platforms can more easily bring their apps to Linux. So we're continuing, down those paths. But yeah, as we're building up our catalog of apps that we're going to be working on, of course, Flutter is, center stage there.
Yeah, and I would like to say that if anybody, excuse me, is looking to, port their app to Flutter or write a new app in Flutter, and if you have any issues developing that on Ubuntu, please come to discourse.ubuntu.com and let us know. And we would like to make sure that experience is nice and easy and smooth for you, because it's a beautiful toolkit. So also, I pasted a link to the Flutter installer that Elio mentioned. So if you have any issues or want to report, accessibility gaps, that's a great place to do it specifically for the installer. Yeah, so it's been a really beautiful release. Pretty wallpaper, pretty shirt. I keep thinking that I have crumbs. Anyways, so can we talk a little bit about the next release? Who wants to maybe tease a little bit of some of the things that we can look forward to in 2020?
Yeah, I can jump in, and feel free for anyone else if they want to add a few bits. So I guess, the first one, let's talk a little bit about kind of security and permissions. So I think one feature that we're super excited, and I know we've been talking about the installer a lot, but there's going to be one more bit, and that's really us bringing ZFS support back. into the installer. So I think folks will be super happy. We've kind of got the right bits in place where we can now bring that back as a feature for 23.10. So look out for that through the cycle. I think, within the kind of context of security, and a part of that is also permissions, right? So, everyone's run into the case where maybe a snap doesn't work as well as they want to, or you get denied access on something. And so we're doing some ongoing work as well around AppArmor prompting. And we want to make that experience much better and involve the user in being able to, maybe allow a permission at some point that they might not be able to do today. So, from the first kind of security and permissions overview, there is more that we want to do. That's not all of it, but just to kind of tease out a few bits is, yes, ZFS support is coming back, and we want to be able to expose AppArmor permissions this cycle as well to help make the user experience better.
So real quick, AppArmor prompting is a word that we hear a lot, or a phrase that we hear a lot. Can you just briefly give an example to folks that haven't heard that before?
Sure. Yeah. So when you have an app running and it needs to access something on your machine that it doesn't, so AppArmor is a kernel security module. That has it's mandatory access control Linux security module. So what that's going to do, it's going to enforce access rights to different processes on your machine. So if you open a web browser and try to get that web browser to open a file that is outside of its, maybe that web browser happens to be Firefox, and that Firefox snap doesn't have access to, say, /temp, AppArmor will deny Firefox access when it attempts to read that. Now, there might be cases where that application might legitimately want to have access to some path on your machine. So from a security model context, what you don't want to do is say, hey, Firefox, you get access to all of the files on my machine, because that's not great, right? Because maybe I'm running something and that thing is going to get access to my .ssh folder in my home directory, or my .gpg folder on my home directory where my encryption keys or my SSH keys are stored. But there are cases where that snap or legitimately needs access to something, for example, like /temp. Now, what we don't want to do is provide a mechanism whereby we say, let's grant access to that app indefinitely, because that's not great either, right? Sometimes you might want to say, I want to allow access for the duration of the session, is an example. And so there's a whole bunch of user experience considerations that have to go on here. There's a whole bunch of work that the kernel and AppArmor team need to do in order to enable this. And so all of it is around when you open up, as an end user, what should really happen, the experience that you should get at the end of all this work is you fire up an application, you need to do something that you don't normally do. So I think one of the examples Oliver shares quite regularly, so I'm going to steal it here because it's a good example, is, I use a password manager because if you don't, you're a lunatic, but I use a password manager. And when I open up my password manager, let's say for the first time, because I've just used the installer and I've just freshly installed the new version of Ubuntu, I've snap installed 1Password. And when 1Password comes up in my machine, the first thing I need to do is, how do I get my secret key into it? And it's like, I don't know, a 30-character alphanumeric key. I don't know if it's 30 characters, but it feels like it's 30 characters. It's probably somewhere around there. And one of the ways 1Password makes this a reasonable experience is you can have a QR code maybe on your phone that you show to your camera. It scans it, and then that's how you kind of autofill those details, and then you type in your password, and you've unlocked your password vault there. Now, from a security mindset, we want to have minimum security permissions that we can have. So the question is, why does 1Password need access to your camera, right? And the answer should be 1Password doesn't need access to your camera, or it only needs access once and then never again. So going through the prompting, the experience you might be able to do, and I'm not saying this is exactly what will land, but what we should be able to do is say to the user, hey, 1Password wants to access your camera. Do you want to allow this for the rest of the session, as an example? You hit allow, you scan your 1Password thing, your 1Password QR code, 1Password lets you finish authenticating, you restart your machine, 1Password no longer has access to your camera. So that's kind of the overview of all of it. There's a lot more nuance in there, and I'm sure I've rambled on and gotten a few details wrong, but hopefully that gives you a sense of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And that example really showcases how complex this can get real quick, right? Because how long do you want to allow access, and the various types of access?
Yes,
kind of like a QR code,
or you have multiple users on your machine, right? Like
right.
If Ollie and I share a machine, Ken and I share the same computer, and what we want to grant to different applications might be different. Or if maybe I grant permissions to some system folder, and then Ollie comes in and he doesn't want me to have access to those system folders. So there's a whole, piles and piles of layers of complexity here that we need to think through to make sure we get this right.
You're making it sound like the whole Ubuntu team develop on one shared machine.
We do, don't we?
Yeah.
Ken's machine. It's Ken's machine.
And real quick, while we're talking about AppArmor prompting, Elio, is there some design element that goes into that?
Yes, there's been actually a lot of UX. My colleague Leah has been working on that, so she spared me of these layers of complexity for most of it. But I had quite a look at it, and it's pretty impressive. And I think there is going to be quite some good outcome for users. So just think of, if you are using an Android and you're installing an app for the first time, that kind of experience, making it very easy, right? But behind the scenes, it's quite complex for us. But yeah, one other thing, sorry for like going a little bit sidetracked here, but one other thing for 23.10 I would like to mention is also the new encryption flow, which is currently hidden under advanced features. And we got quite a few community members complaining about it as well. Complaining is a harsh word. Suggesting it as well. So this would be something we will rethink to make it more natural, to make encryption the default kind of notion, not a kind of advanced feature notion as well.
Yeah, constructive
really
feedback.
Mm-hmm. And it's just another example of how we try to listen to our community. And as developers, we don't always think of every possible scenario that everybody would want. So when people let us know through whatever language, we're really appreciative of just their use case, their particular use case. Okay, cool. Tim, are there can I throw it back to you? Other 2310 things we could look forward to?
No, that's it.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I would just say on AppArmor prompting, this is ongoing work. It's still being designed. So exactly what does land in 2310 is TBC. Obviously, we want to provide as complete a solution as possible. So we'll see how it develops this cycle. But yeah, I think the experience you might get on iOS or Android today, it's not going to be all of that today, because that's a very comprehensive suite of things. But we are striving for something that feels like that. So moving on, I guess the next bit is around software management. So Ken mentioned the software store earlier. I think everyone who uses Ubuntu, who likes to kind of drive their experience a little bit from the keyboard, has experienced this before, where you hit the meta key, you type in software, and you're presented with 4 icons. Software store, and then another one says software and ... another one says software space ... and then additional drivers. And it's a bit confusing from a user experience perspective, exactly what does what. I certainly know I get confused quite regularly. And so what we've done is we've kind of, in our recent engineering sprint in Prague, we stepped back and we looked at the full software management story and thought, what do we want this to look like in 2404? And we worked backwards to where we are today, and started mapping out what we could land when, to eventually arrive at a much more coherent and ergonomic approach to software management. So for this cycle, we're going to do a bunch of changes here, which I'll go into in a moment, that help get us towards that. But we won't be done all of the work with 2310. It'll take longer than that. But what we want to do is make sure that we are, having a meaningful step forward in that software management experience. So Ken's talked about the software store, the Flutter-based software store, which is, looks great as it is. We got lots of design time from Elio's colleagues for this cycle to help continue to make that as shiny and responsive and as pleasant to use as possible. But software management is more than that. So we've got some work to do with the results in your search. We've got some work to do around how permissions are surfaced. So, touch on AppArmor permissions. How does that get surfaced? Well, today it gets surfaced in the software store and in GNOME Control Center. So, trying to look at making that and unifying that, so you're not chasing permissions all over the operating system. And the other bit. So when we launch the new software store, what we're going to lose from the old software store is the ability to see firmware updates. And so Ken and his team have a firmware updater app as well, which is again another lovely looking Flutter app. So for 2310, you should expect to see a better overview search results when you type in software, something a little bit more intuitive. You should see a new app store, and you should see a new firmware updater app as well to help round that experience out. And as I said, more to come for 2404. But those are the headlines.
Yeah, speaking of the new Snap store, the new software store, if people wanted to go ahead and try it out, where would they look for this?
In the preview/edge channel.
Ooh, okay. Very cool.
And
I'll-
what
I know
about
I'm
the
using it.
what about the firmware
Yeah.
updater app as well? Where can they check that out, Ken?
It's in the Edge channel as well. Firmware Updater is the name. Firmware-updater.
Are there birds in your background, Ken?
There are. I'm sitting out on my porch enjoying the beautiful spring
Okay.
day.
Oh, yeah, very nice. Very nice. Well, yeah. Look forward to trying those apps. I'm using the new software store and have been for a while, and it's again just gorgeous. So I would recommend everybody, if you're feeling a little edgy, to go try it out.
The thing that I really like with a lot of the new tooling is it makes it easier for us to iterate, and it makes it easier for the wider community to contribute, because it's a very modern set of tooling. If you're an Android developer in your spare time, coming and contributing to the installer or the Snap store or the firmware updater is easier to do now, because those skills you have writing Flutter apps for Android, as an example, are now transferable. And so you can kind of help build your CV, help build your profile by making contributions to this wonderful set of apps.
And not just the skills, but the app itself, right? If you're working on an Android app and you're using Flutter, then porting that to Linux or building it for Linux is a very simple process now. So calling all mobile developers out there, why not?
That's right.
Well, speaking of mobile developers, are there any Flutter dev positions at Canonical?
Just say keep an eye on the careers page.
Also, Merlin, hi Merlin, had a good question here. Kind of an open question. Merlin was wondering if designing the various interfaces is more difficult because of the limitations of the software. What are your thoughts? Anybody?
I'll speak to that briefly, if that's okay. So I think when we think about something like this, we think about the values that we want the users to experience in the distro when using Ubuntu, right? And we talk about security and privacy as being real core values here, and making sure that the applications that you install only have access to the data that they need, and that you are aware of what access they have and can gradually extend those permissions is a good default position to start from. So we want to move from this ability where we do very strict, often manual for very, very specific permissions, reviews of applications to ensure that they're not asking for permissions that we don't think are appropriate for the app. And we want to empower users to then extend those permissions beyond that, right? So if you're working with the Steam Snap, for example, we spend a lot of time making sure that controllers worked out of the box. In a future where permissions are granted by the user, that sort of functionality is much easier to give to the hand of the user and go, well, this user, if they're never going to use a controller, then they never need to grant access to that particular thing. So this isn't just about the UX experience of the prompt. This is about how do we re-engineer our core architecture and the way we build software in a way that supports that experience. So this isn't, because we're here on the desktop in Indaba, then we're going to talk about it from the desktop perspective, which is really that UX and how individuals interact with and manage those permissions. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of work going on in terms of our security teams, in terms of the Snapd team, to enable this functionality. So the sort of premise that there are limitations of the software that would prevent us from doing that, well, we have that software stack. We have the power to change and build out that stack to support that ultimate experience.
Yeah, that's a good point. While the surface level visual change is nice, it's really nice to see that there's, larger work going on in the background that will ultimately, lead to reducing our technical debt, improving the architecture, and all of these wonderful things. So,
Should we carry on with some of the other 2310 features? Do we have time or?
Yeah. We have about 15 minutes. So
okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's just. I'll briefly touch on two more bits from 2310. There's a lot of stuff. We have an ambitious roadmap for the cycle. I think it's achievable with the team, but so I just conscious I'm only covering some of the main points here. The other bit we want to address this cycle as well is some of the plumbing issues. So this might not be as exciting for some people on the surface, but it's making sure all of our libraries are up to date and that we're ready to support newer hardware and that kind of stuff. So some examples of libraries that we want to get to the latest versions are Polkit. We want to move to NetPlan for network management. We want to move to dbus broker. And we also want to bring libcamera into the main archive. Libcamera might not sound as exciting as you think, but this is about supporting modern webcams on the newest hardware. So
not just modern webcams, but also all of the Raspberry Pi camera modules have relied on some investment on the libcamera front from our side as well. That was some ongoing work we've been doing to support the latest Raspberry Pi camera module.
So we've got all these kind of under the hood changes that we want to land as well. It's difficult in the development series to get testing on these things as early as possible to help us work out any issues that arise. And of course there'll be issues. It's a development series. So what we will eventually publish here, and keep your eyes posted to Discourse, is something to help people set themselves up in the development branch to get as close to this kind of what they can expect with the final version. So do keep your eyes there. We'll have a little bit of guidance on what you can do to help test all of this new stuff as early in the cycle as possible, so we have as much time as an engineering team to resolve issues and make sure 2310 is as polished as possible.
Just a quick note as someone that cares and loves NetPlan. It's already landed for 2310. So
there we go.
Yeah. Update, then you will have that. One thing we didn't mention is, do we know the name for 2310, or should we keep calling it 2310?
We do know the name. Are we allowed? I assume we're allowed to disclose it. Is that right?
Oh yeah, it's very public.
Well known by now, yes.
Okay. Is anyone going to say it? Who's going to say it first?
Mantic.
Mantic Minotaur. So D&D. I love it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think there's some folks planning on doing some 3D printing of Minotaurs. So we'll see what that looks like.
Cool.
Yes. It has been suggested to even perhaps have like a painting contest. I would like to see that, but I don't know. We'll see. Okay. Well, the plumbing stuff sounds really necessary. I'd like to add one more thing from my side is, Canonical and Ubuntu is really invested in snaps. And so I've been working on trying to improve the snap kind of automation story to help improve the maintenance. So that's another sort of back-end plumbing things that will help reduce technical debt and keep things up to date. So that should improve things for Mantic as well. Yeah.
You can see the real benefit of the whole system there when, Ollie touched on it earlier with the Doom acceleration on the Steam Snap, but being able to push the latest version of a bit of software and having it land and available to people as soon as possible. And part of that automation pipeline is that. But then we have the channel system and everything that can let people kind of assume the level of risk they want to take within the applications that they're using. So some people might like to live on the edge, and some people might just want to be unstable, which is totally fine. So everyone can assume the level of risk that's relevant to them.
Yes, absolutely right. Good point. I think there's one more point to talk about for Mantic.
Yes. So one of the other things we're doing, there's lots of things we're doing, as I've said several times, but we want to take a little bit of an inventory of what the default apps are, what does a minimal install, what does a full install, and do consider, for example, if we were to switch from a full install to a minimal install by default. by no means is any of these discussions done. We're just, we want to consider it and as I said, take a bit of an inventory of what the default options are.
Yeah. So if you have thoughts on that, you can go and chime in on the discourse post for the Indaba, and we would love to hear your thoughts about that. Okay, so Mantic Minotaur sounds fantastic. I'm very excited for it. What about beyond Mantic?
Okay.
Ellie,
Yes.
do you wanna...
Oh, sorry.
Or yeah, Tim.
Well,
Either one of you.
I was just going to, say from an engineering perspective, right? It's really hard to just look 6 months out. And so one of the things we need to start doing more regularly, and the folks do it, but have a more systematic process around it, is looking 12, 18, 24 months into the future and then working backwards from that. So we did that with the software management overhaul. We're kind of where we want to be in 12, 18 months from now. But Ollie's done a really good bit of work trying to think through some visions and values that we can then use as a framework to map the engineering against. I don't know, Ollie, if you want to.
Yeah, I think we have quite a strong idea internally of where we want to be in the next sort of 1 or 2 or 3 LTS releases, and it's always hard to have those conversations about what those specific features and capabilities are going to be. There's all sorts of uncertainty when you start thinking that far ahead. We need the ability to pivot and change priorities or adapt our approach to solving a particular value. And so at the same time, we also want to move away from this concept of every time there's a new Ubuntu release, it's a pile of features, right? It's just we delivered all of these different features, but what we want to do is start telling a longer term story that spans multiple releases, so that when we release new features or we make changes, then you can see that in the context of something that is part of a longer journey, right? When we talk about the work we've done with the new installer, that is only the first part of a story that's going to be fleshed out around desktop customization and management infrastructure, but also the user experience, as Elio said, talking about how we solve encryption, thinking about security by default. And I think it's important for us to be talking more in a way that keeps an eye on those long-term things, so that people understand why we are working on the features that we are working on. And so one of the things that we've been doing as a team internally, and not just within the desktop team, within the sort of ecosystem of Ubuntu, is think about, well, what are the things that we value? What are the story threads that we want to talk about every time we bring out new features? And when we think about our engineering roadmaps, how do we group them together into something that goes, well, this makes sense because this is putting us on a road to achieving this ultimate end goal. And so I'll sort of summarize them now because we've only got about 5 minutes, but I think some of the areas that we're going to be looking at are choice. This is about platform support, really. This is Ubuntu working amazingly on Dell, HP, Lenovo, all the work that we do with those suppliers around hardware drivers, making sure that Ubuntu runs well on the latest hardware, making sure Ubuntu runs well on the Raspberry Pi, making sure it runs well on Amazon Workspaces, making sure it runs well on ARM, right down the line. Like making sure that wherever you use Ubuntu or whatever kind of hardware you use, you can use Ubuntu. Quality is the next one. I think this has come through a lot today, but it's about really taking that user experience to the next level, making sure that things make sense and are intuitive out of the box. I think what Merlin said about being clearer about what does ZFS do, what are the pros and cons of using ZFS, making sure these are human readable things, I think is really important, so people can make informed decisions about their operating system. Support is always a big thing for us, making sure that all those security patches are landing, making sure those backports of new features are coming in, making sure the latest kernel is there. Like those sorts of things are the bread and butter of what makes Ubuntu a stable platform for developing with exciting new technologies. The enjoyment is another thing. This is not just things about gaming, which is obviously an easy manifestation of that, but also in terms of the experience of the desktop stuff we're doing around quarter screen tiling, for example, but also in ecosystem things, right? When you're working on your Raspberry Pi or your Ubuntu server and your Ubuntu desktop, does that feel like a coherent and consistent ecosystem? This is one thing I really like about the NetPlan work, right? Everybody can now have a common NetPlan experience across all of those different releases. Performance is something else that we want to invest in quite a lot. We have to keep ourselves very honest on making sure that Ubuntu is lightweight and is performant. And we have a lot of fantastic hardware testing capabilities because of our work around certified hardware. So how do we take advantage of that to make sure that we are, constantly benchmarking ourselves in terms of the things that we're delivering? Privacy is another one. A lot of people switch to Linux because of privacy concerns, and I think Ubuntu is a great private solution by default. I think I want to spend time talking about what data Ubuntu uses when it's doing things like checking for updates, when it asks you for your hardware information after install, all of those things. It would be lovely to make sure that people understand where data is being used in services like debug info D and snaps and snap updates, making sure people have control over what data they want to share and visibility over what data is being shared, not just by us, but by the apps that they install. I think this is one of those things where we talk about pragmatic privacy, right? Ubuntu is not a distro that you would lock down out of the box. We will make opinionated decisions about what makes an acceptable, enjoyable experience for users, but at the same time give users who want to turn that dial one way or the other the ability to turn that dial. And that leads into security, which is something that we've talked about a lot today, with making sure we play nicely with BitLocker, making sure our encryption solutions are really strong, making sure that the permissions our applications have are really well thought out, making sure that when organizations want to bring Ubuntu Desktop into their organization, it's compliant with the various security policies and has all of the interfaces for people to confirm that it's compliant. And then I think finally is this sort of concept of integration, right? So obviously in the sort of business world, we spend a lot of time making sure that we play nicely with corporate identity management software, sort of your Active Directory login, your cloud identity providers, things that we can do in this space. Can we provide a richer experience with Ubuntu One? So it feels like, some of your things follow you around, right? Your apps and snaps, could we have a more persistent concept of that tied to something like your Ubuntu One account? So I think that's a sort of brief snapshot of some of the priorities, but I would hope that over the next sort of few months and few releases, as you sort of read about the features that we land, you'll spot some of the things that I've talked about here and go, oh yes, well of course they're doing that because they're trying to really make privacy a very important, user-friendly and very accessible part of Ubuntu. The same with support, the same with a choice. And I think it's about seeing that through line that I think is not quite a long-term roadmap, but it is a set of themes that show where we're going and how we progress towards those goals.
Yeah, I think that's a very exciting vision indeed. And I look forward to not just Mantic, but the future ones as well. See that vision of synergy really come together to provide all the things we want to provide to all the users that we have. Wow. So we're out of time. I want to briefly thank each one of you for coming, taking some time to be on the Indaba. I know we're spread out across some different time zones. So thanks for making time for this. Thank you everybody for watching. And looking forward to Mantic Minotaur. Just, look out for a wallpaper contest. So as Mauro mentions, he can't wait to see Mantic Minotaur artwork, not just the official one, but the community's artwork as well. So look out for that. There will be a beta testing week and bug smashing like we always do. There will be advocacy and release parties. And you can check out ubuntu.com/community for more information. So thank you all for participating, and we'll talk to you guys next month. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
everyone.